All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another Wednesday edition of Checking In with Telecommuters or Professional Development. Um, I appreciate y'all being here very much. Today, we're going to continue our work and continue to hopefully provide some good resources and some good information and an opportunity for some good discussion surrounding our topic today, which is communication. So some of you I'm looking at, and I think I recognize some faces and some names. So to those of you that have been with us before, thank you. Those of you who've been are here again today and maybe were with us yesterday. So Cindy, I see you. Thank you very much for engaging with us a couple of times this week. And just as a quick reminder, we are doing some Tuesday sessions between 2 and 3 o'clock for designed to deal with and talk about things that telecommuters with children in the home have to think about and are dealing with. So please feel free to join us then as well. And those of you who were with us Tuesday, if you want to pass the word along to others who may have been there, that we're doing these on Wednesday also. Please, the more we can get in these sessions, the better it is for all of us, because I think it provides lots of different perspectives and certainly the moment where we can share information with each other and be a resource for each other. So thank you so much again for being here. I do believe I have the screen. So what we're going to do over the next hour is talk a little bit about communication and dig into some of that information. I'm going to ask you all to mute your mics for the moment, but please understand there'll be opportunities shortly to engage in some conversation. We do have the chat feature up, and I believe myself, I have it up. Maybe Shannon has it up. Shannon's our, and Shannon, I apologize, administrative specialist. I struggled with your title there for a moment. In our HR office, so she's driving the Zoom today, so thank you very much for your help. Jeannie Tennant is our Learning and Organizational Development Consultant. Audrey Robinson, our Training Coordinator, and myself, I'm the Manager in Learning and Organizational Development. And then somewhere in the room today, we have Izetta Slade, who's our Executive Director of HR. So thank you all for your help with this and your support as we continue these sessions. So we are recording these. They are available on the HR website. If you go to the HR page on the left-hand side, I believe the bottom link is COVID-19 resources. And then within that area, you'll find telecommuting resources. And that's where you should see everything we're involved in right now and everything we're trying to do and trying to support campus with. So you'll find recordings, you'll find some printed materials, and you'll find hopefully lots of resources that'll help you. So thank you all for visiting there. And being a part of this again today, okay? So with that, I believe we'll go ahead and get rolling into our first slide.
Okay, sorry about that. I had to move my chat out of the way. So today's topic that we want to talk about is let's put communication in telecommunication. So our goal for this session is that participants will be able to identify behaviors that will positively impact their ability to communicate while telecommuting. We want to talk about and articulate what behaviors those are that impact their ability to communicate, and then also what type of behaviors can we apply after we go through these sessions.
So if you have visited our HR website page, you'll notice that we have a Mindset Monday. And so our Mindset Monday is just an opportunity for us to look at some words, a quote, a variety of different things. But this week it was a quote through that lens of communication. Good communication is the bridge between confusion and clarity. So as we think about this transition to telecommuting and the fact that communication is a complex practice in the best scenarios. There's so many facets of communication. And now that we were continuing to to hone that craft and that practice in the office when we abruptly, for our safety, switched venues. So now we're all telecommuting. So when you think about this quote, good communication is the bridge between confusion and clarity, how would you define good communication? So this is your chance to unmute those mics, have some interaction and dialogue. So how would you define good communication? So Katie says it's easy to understand. How else would we define good communication? So two-way, asking questions, back and forth conversation. Just that constant conversation, so consistency in that communication.
Hey, this is Julie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I would say, especially in our current situation, for me, concise communication is helpful, or purposeful or intentional. So I feel like oftentimes I find myself getting overwhelmed with 300 email conversations, many of them spawning into reply alls. So I've tried harder to, for myself, when I'm sending a message, make sure there's a clear purpose and it's necessary, and that I'm being as concise as possible. And if you know me, you know I like to talk, so I'm trying to rein that in for myself, and then I think, getting that in return from others, we all just might be a little more sane for it. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much so. Thank you for adding that. I think before we had a lot less logistical things we were thinking about, and we didn't have little miniature coworkers running around and things, all these other distractions that make communication at this point in our time in time even more complex. So, while we all try to be concise, it didn't feel nearly as impactful before now. Now there's just less time, less space, and a lot more, like you're saying, reply all, just a significant increase in volume that we're sifting through. So how can we continue to build a bridge with communication, building that bridge from confusion to clarity? So how can we do that?
I'll say, as I look at the chats, the notion of the bridge, and to me, kind of the bridge is that vehicle, or the characteristics of what that communication may be. And the chat messages that came through are two-way. A couple of them are two-way, constant and open communication. And for me, if I think about two-way communication, I think there's the notion of what truly, as we continue this discussion, what does that really mean? The notion of constant conversation, what truly does that mean? Because you can go from one end of the spectrum to another, and I think somewhere in the middle fall into your own perception of what constant means, and then truly open as well. So those are great words that we attach with communication and great ways to describe it. But where the bridge for me comes in is truly, what does that mean to the people involved?
And Brooke added in the chat as well, asking questions. So coming from that place of curiosity, being willing to ask questions, being able to receive questions, truly to build that bridge from confusion to clarity. How do I ask those questions with the intention of gaining clarity and also receiving those questions from that place of curiosity, from that place of someone needing to better understand to get from that place of confusion to clarity. Because even as much as we want to be clear and concise in email, we all also know that we read email differently than it's intended sometimes. We receive that differently. So with just the fatigue that comes with sifting through so much communication right now, it's very easy for that confusion to happen. I know my eyes get tired and my reading comprehension drifts, and so it's just more difficult to read and understand fully. And so we'll continue to work through some of those pieces. And so as you think about telecommuting and communicating during this process, what communication challenges have you experienced? And Julie, you shared with us just trying to be concise, getting through those emails. What other challenges have you faced? And I'm going to encourage you, I'm going to challenge you, unmute those mics and talk to us.
Jeannie, for me, I think one of them is being timely with responses. You know, it's not as easy as just popping over to somebody's office and, you know, asking a quick question. You know, we need to make sure that we're available and that our office staff is available as well to answer questions that we need.
We've said that so many times as our team of three, how much we took for granted being able to pop across the hallway and ask that quick question and then just keep running. So being able to respond in a timely way, and I think there's definitely a pressure, and I'm choosing to use that word, a pressure to be timely, to be available. So doing that in a way that is conducive for everyone is definitely a challenge. What other challenges have you experienced?
This is James. Can you hear me? How often that communication is. You know, just like you said, a lot of hallway conversations or conversations on an elevator up and down that we don't have anymore. And so how often do we communicate with everybody? I'm certainly in agreement with the email perspective. Long before we telecommuted, I think there's an awful lot of emails. And when I began my career, obviously there weren't emails, and some of the people on our call would be that way as well, that you had to take time to write a memo and send it across campus and wait for a response and come back. So everything is so immediate, but how immediate does it need to be and how often is sort of something I struggle with. So.
Thank you, James. And I would connect to what you said as well. Just, you know, as we're riding in that elevator or walking down the hallway, we have time to provide context, which for me is increasingly difficult in email. Let me give you the context to then actually get to my question, or let me give you all this background information to be able to say this is our plan. So knowing that that's so much easier for me and I can be so much more clear and concise, to go back to Julie's words, in person, than to try to provide that in email. And you know, we know that communication is going to continue to evolve, and as you spoke, James, you know, that evolution is very present. But this, again, you know, talking about our current reality, something that we weren't necessarily planning for, and have shifted into full telecommuting mode. And yes, email being a venue that we use most often because of its efficiency, but definitely seeing a significant increase in this current situation. Anything else?
I think a challenge, this is Julie again, another challenge for me is balancing my own schedule with respecting other people's time. And in terms of email communication, the example I have there is, I can do more email probably between 5 and 7 a.m. Or 1 and 3 p.m., that kind of thing. And so when I'm doing email outside of 8 to 5, I try to think, should I wait until 8 a.m. to send this? Because I don't want to start pinging other people who are trying to rest or regroup for their schedule, whatever that might happen to look like. So that's a challenge for me, balancing my tiny coworkers with my regular coworkers and trying to keep the peace. And I don't know if you all saw it a minute ago, but I got hit with a pillow. So, whenever we're back in the office, if somebody doesn't hit me with a pillow, I'll be surprised.
I feel like that's borderline employee relations complaint right there. But yes, and as we've spoken in previous sessions, that trying to just be cognizant of time that, and respecting those boundaries, knowing that if we send that email before or after hours, that there is an impact there. But also trying to weigh that out and balance that with the impact that it has on you. Is this what's best? Is this what's going to be most effective? And those are all challenging questions that we're facing multiple times a day, and so on top of objects being thrown across the room. Anything else? Communication challenges that you've experienced so far? All right, well, we're going to keep these in mind as we move forward, and hopefully as we dive into the content and the pieces that we're going to work through today, that we'll address some of these pieces, and if not, we'll continue to revisit as time allows and as this continues to move forward and evolve, because I think it will continue. Each day is a different day. Each day poses some new challenges, so we'll continue to revisit.
All right. Well, one of the first things we wanted to think about as we worked through this and talked about communication, and this one is probably of the ones we're going to talk about, maybe the most common sense, and maybe we've all arrived in a certain sense at this already, or at least to some degree. But truly, when we talk about, how are we going to communicate during this time? How are we going to bring people together? We all should be using the same platforms, and I know that sounds pretty basic, but I'm looking at my Zoom screen today, and that's what we've been using to this point. But I'm also working with others who want to use Microsoft Office and Teams, and we've, as a team of 3, have experimented with that a little bit as well. So when we talk about collaboration, if your group or the team you're working with is using the same venue, that certainly is ideal. As I think about that and what we just talked about with the challenges, though, is that it can at times be challenging because I have to recall and get familiar with multiple different avenues, which may not sound like a big thing, but to truly switch my gears from one particular product or platform to another and back and forth during the day, it just complicates matters and makes you work a little bit harder. So if you are to the point where your team that you are communicating with and collaborating with on a regular basis is using the same thing, that's great. If there's another way you can standardize that to be the same one across different groups as often as possible, that will certainly help in the sense that you don't have to think differently or act differently or operate differently as it relates to go from meeting to meeting to meeting. And I think that's what's happening right now. I know I've heard from a few folks in our sessions that we're all getting maybe a little bit Zoom weary at times. So maybe a change or a shift in a different platform would help and just re-energize us. I think we're going to try it as well at some point, just to jump into Microsoft Teams and see how that looks and how that feels. And maybe it'll be a little bit better for us. But maintaining that consistency as often as you can will certainly help your communication. The other thing I'll mention here is calendars. It says calendars here. Think about how we're inviting people to our meetings, our electronic meetings, our Zoom meetings, whatever they happen to be. And are we using a consistent method for that? So I have seen just an email with a Zoom link in it. I've seen calendar requests with the Zoom link in it and all the additional information with the call-in numbers and all that kind of stuff. So maintaining some consistency with that will help as well. So when I have a meeting coming, I'm not dependent upon remembering that it's in an email. I've actually got my calendar up and my calendar ready, and that's what's driving me to that next session. Because I have been late a couple of times or thought, oh my gosh, where was that? And I've had to cycle back and kind of dig through, if we talk about all the email we're getting now, dig through all those emails to try and find that one specific thing and that one specific link. What I've also known about myself is that when we originally started the telecommuting process, I created kind of my own UTK Zoom account. And then now I've been through the OIT Zoom account. And then at one point in time, I had a personal Zoom account. So there's 3 of them cycling around in my world right now. Hopefully yours is not like that, but just that moment of trying to remember which one it is that's generated this meeting request. And I had a meeting I had to go to the other day in which I wasn't logged in through central authentication. So I was unable to get to it because I hadn't accessed Zoom through OIT's site. So that created some issues for me as well, and some confusions. I've also had meetings where the Zooms haven't worked necessarily, so get familiar with it, get used to it. The other day I had a meeting that was supposed to start at 3:30, and at probably 3:50, I had 25 email messages in my account from 3:30 to 3:50, all communicating about why the Zoom meeting wasn't working. And so I went to the Zoom meeting first and couldn't get into it. And then I cycled back and looked at my email, and there was 25 emails over the span of about 20 minutes of discussion trying to get into the Zoom meeting. So do your best to get familiar with these things, use these platforms, get used to them, navigate them as often as you can, in the sense of setting meetings up and learning how to record or whatever it is, let people in, use the waiting room, that kind of stuff. And then also navigate, as we do right now, navigate the chat in addition to working the meeting itself. So it can get a bit confusing and a bit complicated at times. But get familiar with it and do your best to standardize yourself as often as you can. Has anyone seen issues similar to mine, or do you find it works well for you, or do you have preferences over one particular platform versus another? And once a meeting, I will talk while I'm muted. I see Rihanna says we've only used Zoom, only using Zoom. Okay. So that seems to be the most used one. I have experienced myself as well. The afternoons, Zoom tends to get a little bit choppy on me sometimes. I don't know if that's my own connection here getting stressed, or just in general, people are logging into Zoom to wrap up the day. I mean, it could be an East Coast, West Coast thing. I truly don't know, but activity in Zoom, if activity in Zoom impacts the functionality of Zoom, it seems like the afternoons here, for me specifically, tend to be a little bit of an issue.
And the one thing I would add is that, although it seems and oftentimes emotionally feels complicated to use these platforms and add to calendars, the goal of this collaboration, this what we're discussing right now, the ability to collaborate, the intention behind that is to streamline it, and provide a place where clear communication can occur. You know, and you know, some people being comfortable with their video on, some people relying on the chat, providing those multiple venues, those multiple what we would call communication entry points to be able to have a voice. So really the intention behind it, although it can be received, and depending on how the day is going and how my little coworkers are working alongside me, and just the number of emails I've sifted through, it feels complicated. But again, we started with our mindset, and I think that's a great connection to go back to right now in terms of how we collaborate, shifting our mindset to really we're intending and attempting to streamline, so that everyone has an entry point right now, even though we're locationally displaced. Everyone can enter and have a voice and have a space.
So the next part we kind of want to talk about are the different channels of communication. So like Will mentioned, there's different types of platforms that you can use to communicate with your teams. So a couple that we just wanted to mention, the first thing is when you are thinking about your message that you want to send, what is the most effective communication method? If you have a short, sweet message, what would be the best channel to use? Would that be IM, video, conference, email? So just talking a little bit more about each one of these. So when we talk about IMs, usually those are more project oriented. So if Jeannie, Will, and I are working on a specific project, such as just a small project that we can communicate pretty quickly back and forth, that might be an instance where you would want to use IM. So that's going to be more instant, get faster responses, and not as detailed as other forms and channels that you can use. Video conferences. So when would be the best time to use a video conference or a Zoom? I think that I would think about the tone of your message that you're wanting to share. So if it's going to be something more personal, and you want to see nonverbal cues, so you want to see their facial expressions, you want to see how they're responding, their body language, I would use more of a video conference or Zoom functionality for that. If you want to share your screen, so such as PowerPoints, or you want to work on projects together where you can all intermingle at the same time and see everything on the same screen, that would be a great avenue to use video. So that would be Zoom. When we think about emails, so sometimes we get emails that we don't know if we need to respond quick. We can wait a while to respond to emails. So really thinking about, am I wanting a fast response? Is this something that is urgent? So which channel would be the best way to communicate that? So emails would be like simple messages, so like scheduling meetings, sharing files, things that you don't need immediate attention to, because we know some people like to communicate via IM. We know people like to communicate versus email. So it's all about the tone and what is the best channel for you to use. And then phone calls. So if you're going to have a conversation that is more in depth and it needs more detail, and maybe necessarily you don't want it to be an email because we want emails to be kind of short and sweet and to the point, phone calls might be a better option for that. You can't see verbal cues, you can't see that part of it, but it might be something where you don't need to see that. You need to get something explained across to the other person, but you necessarily don't have to see their verbal cues to be able to do that. So has there been any, what has been the best and most effective way and channel that you've used? Is it mostly Zoom that we've used that has been the best way to communicate information, or have you been using different ways to communicate based on the type of message that you're trying to communicate? So like Brooke had mentioned that when she sends emails that are not urgent, she tries to include in the subject line "not urgent" or something to that effect. Anybody else have any strategies of how they differentiate if they use IM versus email versus Zoom or phone calls? So Sharon said Skype and email mainly, Zoom for staff meetings. Okay. Connie likes to use IM with her staff while they're working during the day. So texting, so that's another thing that actually is not mentioned on here. So kind of what Will and Jeannie both have already mentioned, thinking about, or Julie also mentioned this too, about, okay, do I send this email right now? We know it's after 5 o'clock and some people's schedules are 8 to 5. So do I want to wait to hold off on that email or text? So thinking about that too, is this something that is urgent and that needs to get communicated quickly, or can it wait until the next day? So casual conversations, more of IM, more official business is through email.
All right.
Okay, so it looks like there's all different types of channels that are being used for communication, and just thinking about what are you trying to communicate and what is the most effective way to do that. Will, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest one thing I do sometimes, and it's one of my, I guess I just get sucked into here, okay? And so when I think about communication now as telecommuting, I sometimes forget, or I do forget, just the phone as a general option. I think of this thing and it becomes text messages or web searches. And then I think of my computer as email and Zoom, I guess, at this point. And what I'm pleased with is I do have, there is somebody in my office who I communicate with regularly who uses the phone and has encouraged the use of the phone. And it's a whole lot easier than, in terms of a one-on-one, than setting up a Zoom session with somebody. It's a whole lot more efficient in that moment than trying to engage in a big, long email chain. So I try to remind myself as well that if I have a question to pose that maybe will be a quick answer, I might send a text to say, are you available for a call? Like I think I've seen in the chat already. But yeah, but don't forget, I tend to forget sometimes that this thing's actually good for talking to people, in addition to texting people and sending pictures to people or whatever it happens to be. We forget to use this thing. I forget to use this thing as a phone sometimes. And every once in a while, that's just the best way, because I don't have a phone here that I might pick up and dial a 42889 and go, hey, I got a quick question for you. That's gone. I don't have that in my space. So I want to try to remind myself not to forget that option as well.
And Will, you brought up an important point in that sending that text saying, hey, is now a good time? Because with these multiple channels, it can also become pretty invasive. It's not as simple as walking down the hallway or, going for lunch to have a conversation. So also being respectful, and if I take it back to one of our first sessions that we did as we embarked on this journey of telecommuting, which was just best practices and really establishing those boundaries for it being okay to ask and to extend grace that now's not an okay time. And so leading in that way to that concise collaborative communication with just trying to find the best time for someone, so that again it can be productive conversation, it can be conversation that is meaningful, and that ultimately someone doesn't feel bad that it's not the best time, or that there's just the communication doesn't become as two-way as it needed to be and as it intended to be.
and thank you. I'm bouncing back in, I know, but this is it. So when we say somebody, I think James, you may have said two-way communication is what makes good communication at the onset of this. So you think about that whole notion of, is email effective two-way communication? It may be if you have time to deal with that particular moment, but again, it may not be if this is a little more urgent and requires a little more timely response. So Jeannie mentioned two-way and that popped me. So here we go. Thank you all.
So then it takes us to our next piece of communication, which is finding a cadence, that rhythm of communication, if you will, as we continue to telecommute. So the first piece of that is minimize the risk of interruptions. Now, if you have mastered that in our several weeks of telecommuting, please let me know. So that bullet point is not intended to say eliminate, because that's just not possible. And so really the goal of a cadence is to find what times of day works best for you, to really focus in on that intentional communication. So we did a session yesterday with our telecommuting with children group, and it's a Zoom session as well. And we talked about analyzing the time of day that we can be most productive and that our kids need us the least amount of time, and where they can be a little bit more self-sufficient. And so what the group really organically arrived at was that the afternoons are far more difficult. And so with that understanding, even if you aren't telecommuting with children, just finding those times of day that you can really be focused in on that communication. So those times that the interruptions are minimized. Again, not eliminated, but minimized. And so also, though, being respectful and honoring that not everyone's going to align with that same time frame that may work best for you. And so minimizing those interruptions when we can, and those work patterns allow us to make plans. So much of our days, we've talked about so many times that there's so many unknowns as to what the day is going to look like, what emails we're going to receive, how all of this is going to play out. But if we're analyzing our work patterns, then we know what times we can really are best for calling people, what times are best for emailing, what times are best for videoing. So getting to that place of not optimal, but what's best given our circumstances. So again, finding that rhythm and that cadence to our day. The next piece is over communicate. And we hear that often as just kind of a term we throw out of just like, oh, over communication is better than no communication. But right now, we've all kind of been interjected into everybody's lives. We get a glimpse into everybody at home. But that doesn't necessarily mean we fully understand everything that each other is navigating to make this telecommuting process a success, or as successful as it can be. So that over communicate also implies that we have to give grace, extend that grace. When we get that, we may get that email message back or that text message back that says, no, now's not the best time. 3 o'clock would be the best time. So just making sure that we're over communicating, because again, also it's so easy right now for things to get lost, overlooked, and just unintentionally ignored. And so Julie mentioned that balancing time and being timely, often it's a good portion of it right now is unintentional. And so following up, over communicating is a way that we can just continue to be supportive of each other. And I think that's so important right now supportive versus judgmental, of assuming that someone ignored it, assuming someone missed it, really extending that grace and following up with each other to make sure that that communication is two-way, that communication, we'll go back to the word that was in the chat, is constant, so that it feels like support and it feels like we're in this journey together. And taking into account that we're doing our best to understand those individual situations without being invasive. And it's a fine line that we walk between over communicating in a positive way and then just overload. And so finding what that means for you and the individuals that you've built relationships with, the individuals that you're continuing to build relationships with, and that you're doing the important work with. So again, having those conversations, being open, being honest, and following up with each other, to again just find that cadence to this telecommuting communication. Because I will tell you, in the office, I'm a visitor. I like to see people's faces. I like to watch their body language. I like to analyze their breathing to know exactly how they're responding to my words. So I spend a lot of time in Audrey's office. I spend a lot of time in Will's office, having those conversations. So, and all of that's intended to over communicate. And so this being a different way to do that and finding new strategies for what that looks like, to where we can still be collaborative. We can still always continue to ask ourselves, what is the most effective way to communicate with these individuals? What method can I use? And what time and what rhythm is best for this type of communication? So you see how those three pieces really flow together to hopefully give us a much more holistic approach to this telecommuting communication.
And one thing when we talk about email, and to me it struck me when we talk about cadence, my cadence may be 5 a.m. is a great time for me to send email, but I have to understand, and Jeannie has to be okay telling me that, or Audrey has to be okay telling me that, hey, you know what, 5 a.m. is not my time for email. So, I'll catch up to that at 8 a.m. or something like that. So just that understanding that if we have different cadence, if you will, to our work, we got to be okay with that right now. I mean, there will be moments when things are urgent, but we've got other avenues for that. We've got phone calls and text messages and those kinds of things where you do get, or can get, a little more quick response.
And I think something that I'm reminded of that we discussed yesterday as well in the telecommuting with children was that there's a certain level of angst about being interrupted. So when we talk about those cadence, having a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, or like Julie's little one who, was pillow fight time, it's okay. And while it, again, it's an interruption, it's a distraction, also understanding that there are times when we can just pre-call that. There was someone yesterday that spoke out in our telecommuting with children, and she was talking about there are times where she can't walk away and check on her kids, and that's okay if that kiddo joins. Who's joining you, James?
Max is getting a little anxious. So whenever you see my bed shake, it doesn't mean it's an earthquake. It just means Max is scratching himself.
He's wanting some two-way communication.
Yeah, he is.
Some attention. And again, and that's the beauty of this, is just, when we have that opportunity, saying, you know what, I may have a visitor during this meeting, and that's okay, because that's part of the rhythm that we're in right now. Whether it's Max needing attention, whether it's my kids. My kids are fascinated with the headset. They love to talk to my coworkers. So in those meetings where they can make an appearance, somewhat normalizing this for them as well. And so that's, again, where we say that cadence isn't about eliminating distractions. It's truly about minimizing and working with what we have right now, continuing to streamline, collaborate. And at the end of the day, our communication should project that we care about each other, that we care about this situation, that we care about each other's safety, our well-being, our growth, and the amazing work that we get to continue to do even in these unique circumstances. And so while it's not a slide on here, each one of these C's also connect to caring.
Okay, so to wrap up a little bit, the objectives that we wanted to cover during this session, we wanted to make sure we could identify the behaviors that will impact our ability to effectively communicate while we're telecommuting. We want to be able to articulate what behaviors impact their ability to effectively communicate while telecommuting. And then also, hopefully after the session, we hope that you can apply some of these behaviors. So some of the stuff that we've already discussed about collaboration and making sure that we understand what each other needs and extending grace. So being able to apply these behaviors in our own work to help each other.
And so as you think about today, and thank you, Audrey, for that wrap up, what is something that prompted your thinking today? Something, and again, guys, like none of this is intended to be like earth shattering. It's truly just intended to prompt thinking and reflection on what are those small things that we can do a little bit differently that are going to make a positive impact. So what's something that prompted your thinking today as we walk away from this Zoom meeting that you want to think about more in terms of how we communicate during this telecommunication process?
Yeah, this is James. My team has decided on a Zoom meeting every other week, which I think is still fine, but is Zoom the right medium to use? And I think, you know, you've opened my eyes to some other things. And as we have our every other week Zoom meeting tomorrow, I'll ask them, is Zoom what you want to keep doing, or is it something different? So we still use emails for the quick distributing out information, and that's no different than when we were in the office. But as far as us getting together as a group, I want to make sure that we're not meeting to just meet and that we're meeting the appropriate way. So.
I'm sorry, I have to ask for a revisit. James, thank you for your comment. I think it's great that we're looking at these and thinking, are we overusing something? Are we using something appropriately? Are we opening up that for the rest of our team? But I thank you very much. That's a great comment, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Now I'm going to period and separate that, and I hope I've done an adequate job of telling you that. But Rhiannon, what the heck's going on behind you? We need a revisit, please. We need a walkthrough one more time. Seriously, you got to bring that back.
Hey Sam, they want to see you again.
Of course we do. Yes.
Just a pastor, he says.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, very nice. Very nice.
Got to keep it interesting at home, right?
Absolutely. That's wonderful. And to follow up on James's comment as well, I think it's so important how you are approaching that with that curiosity. Is this what's best? That you're willing to ask that question instead of assume that there just needs to be a venue change. I have to be really careful, and I have to be very cognizant of this with my team. I want to see them. I'm not sure they always want to see me. And so I'm someone that I could truly sit with Zoom on one screen and my work on the other and just type and chat all day. If you've lived in the HR office with me, I'm sure that's not a surprise to you. But I also don't want to project what I want onto someone else to the point that it's invasive or uncomfortable, or that it wavers on what's best given this circumstances. Because again, we don't always know the ins and outs of everything that each other's processing and navigating. So just coming at this from that place of curiosity is so important to give your team that boost, that that voice, and again, to show that I care enough about you to ask your perspective, with the understanding that just because I'm asking doesn't mean it'll change, but that I care to ask.
Hey, Jeannie, this is Izetta. One of the things, if Zoom has to be part of our lives, I'd say making the most of it for how we use it and varying our communication on Zoom. Have a fun meeting or a fun meeting on Zoom to break it up a little bit. Don't resist having every Zoom meeting be a business meeting. Find some time to have fun on Zoom. And that will certainly help with the communication as well overall if you're making that one of those Zoom meetings just a fun hang out together kind of meeting.
And we've heard so many success stories of that thus far, just Zoom lunch meetings with individuals that you would have Zoomed around campus with, went to lunch around campus with, or those times to go, how are you? How is it? To let my kids talk to some of my colleagues and meet their kids. So again, taking time to breathe and have fun, and enjoy each other. That variance keeps it fun. You never know when the dinosaur is going to walk by. Got to keep fun, keep laughing.
All right. Anything else? Any other comments as we approach 1:55 in the afternoon? All right. Well, we want to thank you again for being here with us. These have become a great way for myself, I know, and I'll let Jeannie and Audrey speak in a moment too, to stay connected with some of you and to see your faces. And I'm beginning to see faces now and recognize names a little bit and see people I'd never met before. But just what I'm looking at on my screen is I've seen Marsha Lane a few times. I'm getting familiar with Cindy's picture, and James, you've been with us a couple of times, and I believe Rhiannon, you've been with us as well. So it's a nice opportunity for us, even though we are in this constraint of being electronically connected. It's nice that we are able to see each other. So when we do get back and we do walk across campus, I hope, I may not remember your name right off the bat, but I'll be able to look at, I know you from somewhere. So that'll be a nice opportunity to say hello and connect when we actually do get back face to face. So for me, thank you so much. These mean a lot to us, and that we can provide them for you. And it means a lot to us that you're here spending your time with us. So go ahead, Jeannie, if you wish.
I'll echo exactly what Will said and add that I'm just grateful for the opportunity. I'm grateful for each one of you attending, your time, your attention, your voice, whether your voice be through the video or through the chat. It's so important that you are an active part of this professional development. And that's exactly what we're seeking out is your voice in this. And just so you all know, like these sessions bring me so much joy. And for that, I appreciate it, and hope to see you next week.